first question we have is from John Esser, who's with Ancestry.com. Where are you, John? All right, John says, personally, I see to a great extent Agile, DevOps, continuous delivery, etc. as outgrowths of lean thinking and concept. First, to what extent is this true? And second, what are we in these communities not doing or can do to improve? What may we be missing? So, John, this is for you. Because, either you have to lean into his chest or have your own mic. Here's your card in case you forgot what you wrote.
Thank you.
You can share that with Steve. And if anybody else has something they'd like, please raise your hand. We'll get you a card and a pen.
So would you like to elaborate on that question a bit?
Well, yeah, I've been doing Agile for quite some time, as probably many people. And it's probably in the last 3 or 4 years that I came across more deep, concepts of lean and lean thinking. And I guess it's kind of like the convergence, right? You just saw so much of what lean concepts and principles that kept manifesting over and over in Agile, Scrum, even things like DevOps, continuous delivery. Okay, so I guess in your view, to what extent is that true? How much did that come out of the lean movement? But then even more, what I'm more interested in is, what are we maybe missing? Is there something we're not doing yet?
There are 2 responses I'd like to make. Let me break this down into A and B. First of all, did Agile come from Lean? Did Lean come from Agile? Were they both spontaneously combusted somehow? I had a really interesting experience about, I guess it's been 2 years ago now. The Lean Enterprise Institute is in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It was founded by Jim Womack and Dan Jones, who were MIT grad students at the time studying the auto industry, and when they published the paper, they went across the street and started LEI. Well, Jeff Sutherland and Scrum Inc. is also based, is Jeff here this morning? He said he might be here. Is also based in Cambridge, and literally offices less than 2 blocks away from LEI. Yet Jim had never met Dr. Womack or Dan Jones or John Shook. So one day we went over and I had the opportunity to introduce them. And we had some very interesting conversations. And in a room, in a whiteboard, in about an hour, we did a swim lane. And we mapped out the lean lineage, which goes all the way back, if you talk to Dan Jones, it goes all the way back to Venice in the 1400s and the Arsenale. But it really started with Ford, and then there was Ono, Shingo. You could throw Senge into the pot to make things interesting. And you look at the Agile lineage of what led to Winston Royce and Scrum and Agile and Manifesto. And what we learned was it really didn't emerge from the convergence of those 2 communities, but they were all reading this, they were all motivated by the same thought leaders. And so I really think of it as 2 communities, like 2 twin sons of different mothers, if you will, that have been evolving in parallel for decades now. And I think just now in the last few years, the 2 are coming together because there's an awful lot that I think Agile can learn from Lean, which is the second question. But there's also a lot Lean can learn from Agile. So that's my first answer. Let me hold my second answer until you have a chance to chime in.
Yeah, no, I guess it's nice to know they're not necessarily, they weren't copies, one wasn't a copy of the other. So, but that there are some common origins and thinking. Was Takeuchi Nonaka, are they Lean disciples? Because that was an inspiration, right, for Scrum?
Yes. And that was a conversation directly between Jeff and John Shook, who was with Toyota years ago. And if you go back to that original Takeuchi Nonaka paper that used the word Scrum for the first time, that was about, I think it was about Canon and Honda and maybe one other Japanese company, but it was explicitly not about Toyota. And when Deming went to Japan, he wasn't just working with Toyota, he was working with many of these. So there was something percolating in Japan for years. Now, years later, of course, Takeuchi published a fascinating paper through HBR on the contradictions of Toyota, that he looks at the culture and the social network of Toyota and how information really flows. So of course that is now, there's been a convergence there as well. But it's not all about Toyota, it's not all about automobiles, it's not all about Lean, it's not all about Agile. It is about learning. And I think that's what we all need to do is remove the labels, if we will, and really talk about the principles. Respect, continuous improvement, learning, visual management, problem solving, trust. And I think you strip away all of the labels, and I think we would all agree those are really the foundations.
That's the core.
Yeah. So the second part of your question, what is missing in the Agile community? And I will intentionally be a little provocative and disruptive here, and to say, I think perhaps the one notion that Lean has been after for decades now, and Womack and Jones, in their 5 principles of Lean, the customer value stream, pull, flow, and continuous improvement. The one I think that gets the least attention is the one that in the end I think is the most powerful, and that is the value stream. If you talk to Dan Jones, he'll say many companies miss this point. Like a product owner, there needs to be one accountable, though not necessarily responsible party, who oversees the whole thing, who is ultimately accountable for making sure the right people come together and make decisions in the right way. And when you get into very large-scale organizations that are heavily siloed and there are lots of dotted lines of authority and communication, that often doesn't happen. And so without the notion of end-to-end accountability of the value stream, the value often gets sub-optimized and doesn't reach the customer. And I've seen a lot of cases where this is true, where Agile teams come together and do a great job optimizing the speed and quality of software delivery, but they don't follow it through, not just to DevOps, not just through testing QA and delivery, but into the actual release and adoption and the measurement of value by whoever the customer is of that software. Because if you don't go that last mile, you may do everything else right, but you deliver a suboptimal solution. And so the values stream notion says break down those walls, invite the customer in, and make sure we're doing the right things and measuring that value. And to the extent our estimate of what that business value is versus what we actually measure when we deliver that, to the extent those two are different, that's a feedback loop back into the PDCA cycle and say, how can we get better about going around the next cycle?
So this is where maybe the idea is Lean Startup is proposing kind of help extend that further into the customer, that we could perhaps start applying.
Yes.
Super. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you, John.
Very nice. Thank you very much, John.
Hand this back to
All right, next up, a little change of direction here. Got a question about balancing innovation. And there's a picture on here, and I'm not going to try and describe it, but the question is, how do you make innovation feed a tactical machine? And this is from Iwe. Iwe, come on up. This one's for you. Here, just so you can show them the picture now, because it's such a pretty picture.
I love it. Make it visual. And it's
I'm Iwe.
Iwe. Very nice. Very nice to meet you. Thank you.
So my question was, so I'm a freelance UX director and digital product strategist based out of London.
Okay.
I've recently finished two tour of duties working for Rupert Murdoch's organisations, so B-Sky-B and News Corp, where I was brought in to disrupt within reason and set up R&D and set up a UX practice. So the long and short of it, I've drawn this diagram, and I'm going to try and describe it so everyone can kind of visualize it. It's a triangle, and at the bottom of the triangle we've got business as usual, things that just kind of keeps the lights on in large organizations. And then there's the big tactical projects, and then there's that tiny, tiny bit of the triangle at the very top there, which is supposed to be innovation. So my question to you is, so I'm a big Lean startup fan, Lean UX, very good at sort of just pulling a team together and experimenting, customer validation. And we ran 8 experiments at News Corp over a 3-month period. A lot of the experiments were metrics-driven, customer validated, and it showed to be much more successful, potentially, disrupting what newspapers, content, and media companies should certainly be doing, but there's such a large organization that at the end of the day I find it very difficult to get back into the tactical side of the projects. And my question to you is, in your experience, how have you managed to pull innovation back in, make it more tactical so that it's more than just playing the catch-up game for large organizations?
Wow, there's about 6 questions rolled in there. But this is you have hit on the area that I've been spending most of my time recently. My latest book, I'm sorry, but my latest book is named Run, Grow, Transform. And the whole title of that comes from a Gartner paper that was published several years ago, which is worth reading. It's worth seeking out reading. Because the point of that is you have to run using operational excellence, which is the productive side of Lean. Driving out waste, reducing cycle time, making things as efficient as possible, because the run side of most IT organizations, whether they're news organizations, financial institutions, healthcare organizations, consumes generally around 80% of the annual IT spend. And it's this big, monstrous, not just technical debt of the metal, the mainframes, and the obsolete data architectures, and all of that. It's the application architectures, and it's the process architectures, the misaligned organizations and dotted lines of communication. So it's not just a technology problem. And sorting that all out is huge, because you can't not run the business, but there's a huge sorting out that needs to be done in order to free up the funding and free up the mind space to go into new markets, deliver new products, and then, and I call that, and Clay Christensen would call that incremental or sustaining innovation. And then occasionally, like Jeff Bezos just buying, the Post, how are you going to really disrupt it? And I think that a lot of industries, 100-year-old companies that thought they had sustaining market share forever, are suddenly asking themselves, we maybe have another decade or two. And if we don't start disrupting, we will be disrupted. So how do you do that? It's easy to be a Lean startup when you don't have all that baggage. But how do you be a Lean? Do you become a Lean startup when you do? How do you shed that? One approach is the Jim Kelly approach at Lockheed Martin, where he put a bunch of guys in the warehouse and sheltered them from the dysfunction of the organization, and 2 years later the SR-71 Blackbird comes out. Well, that's one way of doing it, the Skunk Works approach. But you're just simply isolating yourself from the dysfunction of the organization. I don't know if Alan Shalloway's here, but that's one of my favorite quotes from his latest book, which is a Scrum team, an Agile team, shouldn't shelter themselves from the dysfunction, or you're sub-optimizing. You need to open up and break down those barriers. But how do you really create a healthy environment for innovation? And that's a cultural question.
Yeah. So I can give you another example. When I was working for B2B, Netflix came over to the UK and wanted to take market share of the sort of mobile access to movie content. And Sky still owned the rights to the latest movies, so they were able to potentially charge for a premium service. And what started off as, and I helped sort of define this project, what started off as a potentially great Lean startup into large organization project ended up being overtaken by the huge machine, because processes, everything through to single sign-on, personalization, it all ended up being stuff that was already a legacy system that they had to incorporate into this Lean startup. It ended up making it not a Lean startup, and just like any other big tactical project.
If you really look to the root cause of this, and Dan Jones and I are spending quite a bit of time right now collaborating on this, because we really think there's something there. The energy behind Lean Startup is so powerful. But what does a big organization like you're describing do about it? And how do you really get to the root cause? In my mind, the root cause is, and again back to Clayton Christensen, real disruptive innovation is disruptive not only to your competitors, but to yourself. Yeah. If you introduce a really disruptive innovation, you are going to overturn the structures and the territories that exist within your own organization. And if you don't create an organization that is adaptive and doesn't resist that sort of reinvention, then you're going to have the sort of behavior you're describing. Now, how do big organizations do that? That's a whole other question. A question of culture, a question of leadership, a question of motivation, compensation. I think ultimately, though, it's a question of purpose. Is there a clear, consistent mission in the organization, or is it just about making money?
Yeah. So just my final thought on that, and if you could give me some feedback, is that so there's this used to be a digital product director that I was working with at News Corp, who left and moved over to New York. And the one thing I really remember him saying to me was, "Ewa, you should do it first and then ask for forgiveness afterwards." So to get buy-in at senior level to allow you to do that's great. But when he left, I mean, the leadership was their mindset was different. So I think what you were saying really resonates, because I see that if you don't get senior buy-in, peers sort of supporting you, then it's very hard to sort of innovate on your own.
Yes. And we see that in the Lean community as well. As long as Lean has been around, and as many companies put tremendous emphasis. Dean Leffingwell yesterday in his presentation made the point that anytime you introduce Lean into a manufacturing organization, all the mid-managers, they don't go through a day or two of training. They go through weeks. And that's the only way to truly change the culture and the behavior. But even so, even in those large-scale organizations, when you do that, often we see that one key person, one key champion or thought leader moves up or out, and give it a year or two, and it all collapses back in on itself, and it all reverts back to the old behaviors. So that's very fragile. And we've seen that again and again. And that, when that happens, that was not the true transformation of the organization and the culture. That was one individual's persuasive power. And how do we transcend that?
Okay. I have so many more questions, and I think maybe I'll try and contact you later.
We'll be around. Great. Oh, if you'd hand that back to Doc. Thanks,
Excellent. Thank you, Yue. All right. Another change of direction, because you've stimulated just such a variety of questions. So it's been fun for me to go through them. I'm going to invite two people to come up. They don't know each other. They're not together.
Okay.
But one, Nikita asks, do you have some ideas how to make smooth roadmap from traditional budgeting to beyond budgeting ideas? And Rich Lang asks, how do you help an organization become supportive of continuous improvement when funding is provided only for capital projects? And in my mind, these are kind of interestingly synergistic, so I thought you gentlemen might have an interesting conversation. You need to move over a little bit, Steve, because you're going to have two people up there with you.
Come on.
So gentlemen, I only have one mic, so you'll have to share it. Have at it. I'm still taking questions.
Are we getting to the root cause on this question, or what? Rich, nice to meet you. Kita, nice to meet you. Have a seat.
So first of all, sorry for my English because it's not my native. So as I said, it's everybody knows that a traditional budgeting it sucks. So everybody hates them, but everybody but everybody do this.
Yes.
So and when you introducing ideas to the company of beyond budgeting. So everybody says that's very nice, but how we can start it?
Yes.
So is there some quick wins that shows that this way is more productive way to release funds in the company? So this is my question. Maybe some tips from your experience how this change starts.
This is a very deep pool we're wading into, so let me set some context here for those of you who aren't aware. And actually there was a session, I think 2 afternoons ago, that I happened into that turned into a discussion on beyond budgeting. I don't know if you were a part of it, and I don't remember her name, but she treated the topic very well. Good. Utah, yeah. Beyond budgeting is an organization, I think it's beyondbudgeting.com or .org, started by a fellow named Steve Player. And it's basically around the notion of lean budgeting or agile budgeting, call it what you will, which is if you plan what you're going to spend a year in advance, then the people accountable for those budgets spend about 11 months of the year explaining why the budget doesn't match reality anymore. And it's foolish. And everybody knows it. Even the CFOs know it. But their hands are often tied. Who are their hands tied by? The bankers, the analysts, the market, the CEO, people who don't understand, people who have grown up their whole lives understanding, going to MBAs, that this is the way it's done. This really, what we're getting to the heart of here, and this again ties back to what I think the real notion is that's holding a lot of this back in terms of innovation even, is this notion of certainty. We budget things because we want to create a veil of certainty, time, cost, resources, outcomes. When we all know, both in the lean world and the agile world, and I'm not just talking application development, I'm talking agile program project management in general. And this is the message that I'm hoping to bring into the NGO space, is that you don't fund something a year or two in advance and then beat on people holding them accountable to something that's no longer relevant. There are enough companies out there that are practicing this, and legitimate companies, respected companies like American Express, who have the data, who can prove that this works. And there are some very respectable articles in very respectable journals like CFO magazine. I think last year had a great article on Steve Player, and Journal of Accountancy and other magazines. So there's enough of it out there that there is legitimacy, but there's a huge push back from people who just want to know how much money are we going to spend this year. So I think that's the root of the problem. Now, how do you get about solving it? There's a long conversation there.
Are there any things that you've come across, or maybe examples of something that it's worked to sort of get that mindset change? Because we face that everything, unless it can be a capital project,
Yes.
just isn't going to get funded. And so we might even start up something in sort of a skunkworks thing, and then all of the time they find out, oh, we have developers that are working on things which aren't funded. My gosh, you have to stop that. It doesn't matter how significant that might be in the long term.
Yeah, the whole CapEx, OpEx thing, that's just a tax convention.
Yeah.
Yet, if you really look at how guys are behaving and how we make our investment decisions, it's totally backwards. But it means big dollars at the end of the year, and so it's a real thing. There's one fellow who happens to live in my hometown, and I finally happened to meet him for the first time a couple of years ago. He's one of these lean leaders that rarely gets much acknowledgement, and his name is H. Thomas Johnson. And he is considered the founder of activity-based budgeting years ago. And a few years after he founded activity-based budgeting, he came and made a public apology and said, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Activity-based budgeting is foolish. It's the worst possible thing you could do. But by that time, the activity-based budgeting, activity-based costing, ABC, which led to activity-based budgeting, he said it's nonsense. And he publicly, backed away from it. By then, a whole industry had been created around it. And he went on, he spent 10 years with Fujio Cho's authorization inside Toyota, figuring out how Toyota really managed accounting. And one of my favorite quotes from Taichi Ono was, we not only removed cost accounting from people's minds, we not only had to chase the cost accounts out of the plants, we had to remove accounting from people's minds. The whole notion of driving operations based upon abstract numbers and spreadsheets is completely wrong. And Tom wrote a book that's really worth reading called Profit Beyond Measure, where he talks about the only thing that really drives operational improvement are the people on the shop floor responding to problems every day through the guidance of leadership aligned with the true north of the organization. And anytime anybody at any level of management or leadership tries to run operations based on abstract numbers in spreadsheets or on quarterlies, you're going the wrong way, because that's not where you might derive some short-term gains that way, but you don't see long-term value. And so there's a lot of that mixed in. So the one area I've seen moved in this direction the strongest in the last decade is rolling budgets. Where, and it's cycle time, let's reduce our cycle time. Rather than doing annual budgets, let's do quarterly budgets. And let's stop calling them budgets, let's call them plans. And if in some radical cases, particularly in startups, where you might be pivoting on a regular basis, let's do a monthly rolling plan or a weekly rolling plan. Reducing your cycle time, dealing with uncertainty. So you're spending less time planning and adjusting to the inaccuracies of the plan, and more time actually figuring out what the environment is you're sensing from the environment, feedback loop, shorten that cycle time. Now, how do you tie that back into CapEx, OpEx, and what you tell the analysts and everything? That's where I think Steve Player in Beyond Budgeting has some really good content that's worth looking at. But in the end, we can talk about this until we're blue in the face, but we've got to get the CFO involved in this argument and help break this notion that we can force certainty into uncertain situations by wrapping spreadsheets and controls around it. I think that's the root cause. I don't mean to be the final answer here. Let's keep this going.
Well, yeah, I mean, that is, and you're right. I see these great sessions and all this innovation, and even my own teams, great work that has got such incredible potential that gets, sort of pulled out from them because, there's like, no, it's not a capital project. We can't, get certain people to work on these things. So getting, I assume that what we try to do to some extent is bring some of those ideas to the senior executives, the C-level people, and get them exposed to it and get them excited about it. So that's one of the things that I've tried to do with moderate success, because if you can get one of the C-suite people excited about, wow, that's a really cool thing, because again, it's sort of like the shiny object theory. They see like, oh, there's a new shiny object that we really want, then you can sort of make a little bit of an inroad there, but that's the only thing that I've seen be moderately successful. But still, in the end, it goes back to, like I said, that CFO thing. Our process is this, and here's the rules, and that's what we have to follow.
Yeah. In a way, this conversation kind of ties back to the question that came earlier, which is run or transform. How do you reduce the spend on those things that are running the business, that are deeply embedded, and how do you smoke those out? How do you eliminate them? And we had this conversation in that session the other day where, what are those things that you must spend money on? You can't not, like regulatory compliance, or things where you just need to keep the lights on and keep the business running. But at the same time, how do you make those more efficient so you're spending less and less of your capital on those? And it was interesting because if you're in a regulated environment, there are certain things that you can't not do. In a commercially delivered software product environment, the commitment you make to your customers through the product manager, those are commitments you can't break. Whereas in other industries where you're mostly developing software for internal use, you can manage that backlog and shuffle things around. So I think it's very context sensitive what's discretionary and what's not.
Yeah. Our industry in particular is difficult.
That's my not so subtle way of saying your 10 minutes is
That's
up.
really effective. That's effective. So, great question.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Rich.
Appreciate it.
It's amazing how fast 10 minutes goes by, isn't it?
Yes.
When you're really passionate about your subject. Thank you, gentlemen. Is there some woman named Diana here? Because, she had a question. Diana Larson asks, how do you see the similarities and differences between Agile and Lean IT and the links between their approaches to DevOps? And I like this because you've mentioned DevOps a number of times in your conversations. And so I thought this would be a good question here, Diana, in case you forget. Would you like a microphone? You're welcome.
Well, and I just want everyone to know you are the reason I'm here. Thank you. Come have a seat.
Yeah. Last time we were sitting on a couch together, we were at your house, and your wife was there. And it was
Yes.
kind of nice. So, but down to business. We had the pleasure of discovering little while back that we actually live in the same town after knowing about each other for
But
a
we
while.
only run into each other in other towns.
Right,
so we had to correct
it's
that.
that phenomenon. Yeah. So I'm very interested in same and different, similarities and differences between different things, because I find that we can discover some patterns there. And so I was thinking about Agile and the way the Agile Alliance at least has really chosen to focus it on software development. And that's so closely aligned with Lean IT and the things you've written about there. And so I'm wondering about what are the similarities and differences as you see them.
There's an old Zen saying that the moment you put a label on something, you kill its essence. And I think a lot of that goes on. A lot of that goes on in the Lean community, in the Agile, and the Scrum. So I always like to strip those labels back to the core principles. And when you do that, there are more similarities than differences. As best I can tell, I'm the first one to use the term Lean IT in print years ago in the first book. And I didn't really know what I was doing at that time because I was taking what I was learning in the Lean world and applying them to the world of IT. And I knew at that time a bit about Agile and a bit about Scrum, but the depth of what I was really doing at that point, I did not know. And it's been 8, 9, almost 10 years of unfolding. In that time, I realized that it's the world not just of software development, but of product development. Back to Takeuchi Nonaka, back to Don Reinertsen, back to amazing product development things that Toyota's been doing for years, and then bring that into Agile and Scrum. Let's bring in the whole world of IT operations and ITIL and COVID, who have been, in the heart of the ITIL framework is the Dev and PDCA cycle. And now DevOps, the two of them are starting to blend together. And then if you talk to Mary Poppendick, she'll say the development people don't even consider themselves IT. They say, well, we're not IT, we're developers, we're product creators. So all these labels and all of these boundaries are artificial, I think. I have no idea if I've actually answered your question. Let's throw that out there as a starting point.
Well, it is an interesting kind of thing how, I think one of the conversations that's coming up in the Agile world right now is, well, is Agile only about software development, or how does it move into the rest of the organization, and how do you make the changes to adopt Agile without including the rest of the organization? And of course you can't. It's all kind of one ecosystem. And you have to pick a place to start, right? And I think in terms of your discussion about history, I also think about the things that Tektronix was doing back in the 70s and 80s around technology and cross-functional teams, and they had a huge focus on the value of cross-functional teams that they were at the time calling self-managing, but were very like the self-organizing teams that we're thinking about now. And that came from another whole stream of work around quality of work life and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of threads weaving together, I think, for today.
Now, I know and respect the journey you've been on, Agile and all the way through human system dynamics and all of that. And I'm going to turn the question around and ask you, what does this all have to do with human learning?
Yeah. Actually, I submitted another question that's kind of like that. Well, because of initially I got into thinking about that because of the emphasis from the manifesto or that I saw in the manifesto and in the various frameworks and methodologies on closed feedback cycles and learning, right? And continuous improvement. Closed feedback cycles and continuous improvement. And the more I have been hanging around that arena, the more I have noticed how deeply, at least the software world, how deeply learning is embedded in every single thing we do. You know, learning about what the client and customer needs, learning how to work with our product owner, learning how to work as a team, learning whether our unit test will go red or green, learning how the behavior of the code, learning about what the acceptance criteria are. I mean, it's just on a daily basis. It's not isolated trainings. It's learning, and certainly continuous improvement retrospectives have to do with learning about how we just worked together and what we might want to do differently going forward to improve our process, improve our teamwork, improve our method, practice, whatever. So, learning is very central. And you know, when I think about Lean, of course, one of the first images that comes to mind is Plan, Do, Check, Act, which is a learning cycle. And now Lean Startup has Build, Measure, Learn, which sometimes I want to go the other way. I want to make it go Learn, Measure, Build, you know, but I think you can spin it. Or make it a spiral or something. Learning seems so central to everything that we do because it's knowledge work. Yeah.
In fact, now that you mention that, many of you read the Cutter Journal. Dan Jones and I co-authored an article on knowledge work just like 2 or 3 issues ago, and that was really fun because in the end we concluded all work is knowledge work. There's nothing, if you really go, and back to Toyota because they're the best gold standard example, you go down on the shop floor, yes, they're making cars, but they're learning. Every moment is a learning moment. And I'd like to tie this back to one of the earlier questions was, what can Agile learn from Lean? Lean has been around now in one form or another for close to 60 years. And it's gone through various evolutions, just like the Agile has gone through various evolutions. But in the last 5 years or so, particularly as Lean has moved out of the manufacturing space into services and whatnot, the original leadership of LEI, Jim Womack, Dan Jones, John Shook, and others have realized that there has been so much focus on tools and techniques, value stream mapping, Kaizen, A3, and they're all good tools and techniques. But at the enterprise level, the Lean enterprise level, it's about the culture, it's about the learning. And we at LEI were revamping the whole leadership education series because we realize it really does have to start with leadership. And John Shook will emphasize that it's important for a leader to be comfortable not knowing the answer. It's leader as a coach.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. Let's figure it out together. And you can tie that back to the humility lessons of Peter Senge. And being okay, the higher up the organization you go, the more pressure I think you feel to say, I know the answer. And the more you have to catch yourself and say, I don't know the answer. I maybe thought I knew the answer 2 years ago, but things are different now. And let's have the humility and the open-mindedness to explore that together. And that may be the hidden element of a lot of large organizations who've kind of become ossified in reinventing themselves.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by the kind of a concept I've been running across, maybe made it up, I don't know, but of co-learning. And that's the, I don't know, let's figure this out together. Or, I don't know, but I know somebody who does, let's bring them in. Or, you know, I know somebody who's really smart in this area, let's learn about it together. And I think that's the core of cross-functional self-organizing teams, right? We've got a lot of different skill sets that are interdependent because we can't put the product out the door without all of them, and we have to learn from each other. And we have to know and rely on the fact that I may not know the answer, but in my team, we can figure it out.
So I'm going to ignore Big Ben this time because I have one question. What do the roles of shared purpose and trust play in creating such an environment?
Oh, they're huge. And I think at some level, there are a lot of people who say that, any kind of collaborative work is built on trust. And I think that's true. But if we don't have shared purpose, why are we coming together? Why do we even need to trust each other? Right? And so I think they're really competitors for kind of the fundamental building block. And that's key. Yeah. Thank you so much.
It's hard to stop
Everybody
talking.
doesn't
Between
have
the
to
two
do
of
that.
you, between the two of you, it's just, it's interesting. I get it. It's so hard to stop. I prefer never to stop talking, Diana, but it has to happen sometimes. All right. Saif Islam, is that right? Saif, where are you? Did you leave? Oh, there you are. Come on up. So Saif has a question, and again, a little shift, but it's kind of relevant to the last one. What are some success patterns and failure patterns of Agile Lean transformation? So I think this relates to what you and Diana were just talking about and some of the other conversations you had. And I thought, let's get that thread going, Saif, here, just so you don't forget what you said. And that's for you. Grill him, make him work.
So Saif, nice meeting you. That, I really have to dig deep to answer that, and here's why. There are a lot of really fascinating notions that have come out of the Agile world that are completely unknown contextually in the Lean world. And the idea of a pattern is one of them. And I'm a pattern person. I see in patterns. But that question kind of leaps the chasm from taking a notion out of Agile and into the Lean space. So repeat the question and embellish on it for me a little bit. Let's riff on this one.
So large organizations want to do Agile, want to do Lean.
Yes.
And so when you think of Agile and Lean, there are a set of practices and principles. But at the end of the day, how do people learn this? Practices and principles. How do they apply? How do they overcome organizational changes, resistance, get management buy-in, the cultural change? So that aspect is really big.
Yes.
Okay? So learning is so all these cultural aspects, organizational aspects. In our experience, what we're seeing is that especially in large organizations, these things are very, very big. So
Yes.
there are a lot of success patterns and failure patterns. So I wanted to know from you, what are like some of the key success factors or patterns or failure patterns out there? We have borrowed a lot of things from John Kotter, Harvard Business School, Leading Change, Kotter Framework.
Yes.
For example, you gotta have the sense of urgency. You gotta have the guiding coalition, the executive sponsorship. So there's the 8 stages. So we have applied a lot of that in this Agile transformation that we do. But I wanted to hear from you is, what are your thoughts? What are the key elements that have to be there for this kinds of transformation to be successful?
I would start out with the word transformation. It's a word that we all use commonly. Do we really think about what that means? We're not talking about change. We're talking about transformation, where something, the essence of something, changes entirely in its essence. You can probably tell by now I'm a fan of Peter Singer.
Yeah, me too.
And one of my favorite sayings of Peter Singer, we all have mental models. We have to have mental models. And he says the problem with the mental model is when you don't know you have one. You have to understand the mental model and the process that you filter your world through. And if you really, I won't ask you this directly, but often when organizations approach me in one way or another and say, we want to do this, we want an Agile transformation, we want a Lean transformation. Why on earth would you ever want to do that to yourself? You know how hard this is going to be? Do you really know what you're asking for? And of course, I don't do it that way, but you try and draw them out and say, what are you really thinking this is? Well, let's start with why. What is the problem you're trying to solve here? Why is it you put yourself through this? And that invariably leads to the burning platform, Kai's burning platform. But is it reactive or is it proactive? Where are we going with this? That's one pattern. Not knowing what you're getting into. Of course, on the other hand, can you afford not to transform? I can't envision an industry now, a company that can feel safe for any period of time if they're not being paranoid, like Andy Grove said. So that's one. Another anti-pattern I see is leadership, senior leadership, saying we've got to do this. We've got to get all our managers trained right now. And stop right there and say, let's go back to step one and say, why are we doing this? And starting at the strategy level. There is a technique in Lean called strategy deployment. Hoshikanori is the Japanese name for it. Again, came out of Toyota. And there's a lot of good work on that these days, which says you can do everything you want at the mid-levels of an organization, whether it's on the development side or the operations side, to continuously improve what you're doing. And there's a lot of pain in the middle of the organization, and you can make a lot of improvements, but they're all point improvements. They're all isolated. They're all sub-optimization. If you really want to transform yourself rather than just continuously improve yourself, the first thing you need to do is say where you're going strategically, and then find out where you are today in those areas that matter most. And you can only pick a few at a time. And then those gaps that you need to strategically address need to cascade down through the organization to those stakeholders in the various parts of the organization that need to make those changes, and that drives the Kaizen process, that drives the improvement process. It might involve developing software better, quicker, faster, but it might also involve listening to the voice of your customer better. It might involve better supply chains. Whatever the key vital issues are to the organization is where you need to focus your improvement effort, because there is more improvement opportunity than you will ever have bandwidth for, so you need to be selective. And I see a lot of organizations starting with continuous improvement and spreading it like peanut butter, which may be okay to create the awareness and create the competency, but at some point you have to focus it. And I see that's where leadership really has to engage, because in the end, that's the role of leadership, is to set the challenge and the direction and the vision.
So, in many cases, the organization knows, or they think they know why they're doing the transformation.
Yeah.
And then the big challenge is, okay, they have the short-term quarterly goals that they have to deliver against, right? But then...
And where do those goals come from?
From the organization's vision, objective,
Okay.
roadmap, right? So,
Okay.
so you
I was wondering if it came from the annual budget.
definitely related to that, right?
Yes.
So the challenge oftentimes is, you've got to learn the new practices, principles,
Yes.
apply those,
Yes.
and deliver
Yes.
software and whatever else that you work with.
Yeah.
So that learning, and it's almost like changing the tire while the car is moving. So that's really very tricky balance. You got to make sure
Yes.
you have the right people involved with the right experience, because
Yeah.
you can't always expect them at that. Right? It's kind of, if there are lessons learned already, why go through that expensive learning experience, right?
That brings in mind one more thing I'll mention, another pattern, and I've been calling this the three-layer cake for years. I look at the organization as three layers: leadership, management, and the frontline workers. And often the pattern I see is actually leadership is excited. They may underestimate what it is they're trying to do, but they see the burning platform. They see the strategic horizon where they had better disrupt themselves or they'll be disruptive. So at least at the surface level, it's not very difficult to get leadership excited about a lean-oriented transformation. At the same time, the frontline workers, they're the ones dealing with the customers every day. They're the ones that are dealing with the problems. They feel the waste and the frustration more than anyone. And if they haven't completely checked out and become cynical, and they still have a sense of purpose and a sense of pride in what they're doing, which most people do, they feel a strong sense of urgency in wanting to make things change. You get them in a room, you do value stream mapping, Kaizen, you put them on an Agile team, and you get that enthusiasm point. But it's the middle management layer that is often schizophrenic. On the one hand, they want to drive change with the teams. They want to create that purpose. They want to do this. But at the same time, they're being held accountable by leadership and the traditional governance and control mechanisms. You know, hey, this Agile and Lean thing is great, but you got to hit your numbers.
Right.
And if you don't hit your numbers, all of a sudden this Lean Agile transformation stuff is an extracurricular activity. And the moment that happens, guess which one wins? And so we need to really honestly realize that that middle layer, if we don't overcome that schizophrenia, and that's where leadership really has to ask themselves, do we mean what we say about transformation? Because there is a short-term price to pay in operating performance if we're truly going to change. And that's a big pattern.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, that's all very valuable.
Good.
Thank you very much.
You. And Doc, I'm going to pull a trump card here, and I'm going to override the next card you have in your deck and ask Jeff to come on up, because I just see he just came in. I hope you don't mind me
Well,
putting
if
you on
you
the spot.
insist. I don't know. Does anybody really want to hear from Jeff Sutherland?
Come on up.
Okay, Jeff, come on up. Has everybody met Jeff Sutherland? Let's welcome Jeff. You might have heard of something that he was involved in creating called Scrum.
So, what question do you want me to ask you?
I don't know. Let's talk about the role of Scrum in the larger context of change and not just application development.
Well, as we talked about,
I think I'm asking you the question.
yeah. Well, it was very interesting when we met a couple of years ago. You invited me over to the Lean Enterprise Institute, and I had never met Professor Womack or John Shook. It was fascinating to talk to those guys. And my first question was, after working with Takeuchi Tanaka for a couple of years, they never talked about Lean. And Takeuchi had written a book. He studied Toyota for 6 years. The word Lean wasn't in the book. So I said, why is that? You guys talk about nothing but Lean. And the Japanese never mentioned the word. How can that be?
Toyota doesn't use Lean either.
Right.
They talk about the Toyota production system, the Toyota management system.
But I thought it was really interesting. You drew the yin-yang on the board. Said, okay, Takeuchi and Tanaka are focused on knowledge generation, new product development. Using Scrum teams, you'll see that they're Lean teams. And we're over on the assembly line looking at the Toyota cells, which are really little Scrum teams, implementing all these Lean practices. So it really is both sides of the same coin. So that caused me to go back and read more carefully the Machine That Changed the World, Womack's first book. And in there it describes Taiichi Ohno came back from studying Ford and General Motors. And the first thing he did, he said, you know, all these specialists on the line, they create a lot of waste. And then he said, we're going to form them into a cross-functional team. And this foreman that they have at General Motors telling people what to do, that doesn't work very well either. So we'll have a facilitative team leader who will fill in for the team members. And as soon as he got that work in, he introduced continuous improvement. So today, in my mind, that's the first documented case of a Scrum implementation. So that's caused me then to start looking more carefully at the way people are doing Scrum. And, you know, in the world today, the Standards Group published some interesting data last year showing that the success rate of Waterfall was 14%, and the success rate of Agile was 42%, which is great, it's 3 times better. But what about that 58% of Agile teams that can't deliver on time, can't go over budget, or totally fail? There's a lot of bad Agile out there. And so, you know, I'm coaching people to go back and read The Machine That Changed the World and get kind of reoriented about what Scrum is to try to eliminate a lot of the problems that we have out there. So.
Fascinating. Where I would love to take this works in my heart, which is the world of nonprofit. And what I have observed over the last decade or so that I've been in the field and intimately involved. In fact, I was just in Uganda a month ago with Green Foundation, and they're using Scrum. And they're really excited about it. They're connected with their customers in the field. And I think we both believe, I know you have a long history with this as well, that the real power of empowering, what makes Lean work, what makes Agile work, what makes Scrum work is the same thing that makes most development efforts with microfinance and other efforts, is empowering a team, helping them with the knowledge and helping them overcome whatever obstacles are in their way. Because we're sitting up here on the couch because we won the birth lottery. They're just as amazing human beings out there. They just need a little help in terms of helping organize themselves and helping overcome the obstacles they face. And so here we are in the developing world, and we throw a lot of money, and we throw a lot of organizations, and we throw a lot of materials at them. But we find often these projects aren't effective. We plan these projects 1 or 2 years in
Right, they're
advance.
like our big waterfall government projects.
Big
Yeah.
waterfall government projects. And I just wonder, is there a way we can take this iterative project mentality and overlay this in the world of NGO development and make some headway? What do you think?
Well, I think there's several different things that come to me into mind. One, as you know, back before we started scrumming, I was working with Axiom, which is a big microenterprise organization in the West, based on the Green Bank. And in my day job, I was going into, lead software developers. And after hearing about how you could, build a team of small entrepreneurs that couldn't feed their children, and when they came up with a plan, giving them $25, and all of a sudden, they not only can feed their kids, they can buy them clothes, and now they can send them to school, and pretty soon they're building a new house. I went in one day to the software team, and I said, you guys remind me of these poor people in Latin America. You actually have enough money, but you never have enough software. You're always late, you're always behind, management is always complaining, you're never good enough. I said, do you want to live the rest of your life like that? They said, no, of course not. I said, well, I have this idea. I got it from microenterprise lending and from the Green Bank model, that if we put our heads together and self-organized strategy, we could bootstrap ourselves out of the poverty that we're in, not enough software, bad quality. And I said, I bet in 6 months we could produce so much good software, management and sales would be asking us to please slow down, that it would be like drinking from a fire hose. And it only took 6 months to do that. So, going back to the previous comment, the fact is, 58% of our Agile teams haven't got that together yet, so maybe we need to start talking about microenterprise lending more. I don't know.
And it's interesting because now that comes full circle, because microenterprise in a way led to your thoughts on Scrum, and now fast forward, 30 years later or so, and Grameen is now practicing Scrum. And in Uganda, what they learned in microfinance, which led to their innovations in mobile banking in the field, has led to a new program called Community Knowledge Workers, where they're sending people out into the field with smartphones into the very poor villages who happen to have strong cell signals in remote Uganda and remote Kenya and remote Ghana, and putting these cell phones in the hands of the villagers. And in this one village I visited, I asked, so what's happened in the last 6 months since this person has come around and helped you troubleshoot your problems you're having with your crops? And one woman with a baby in her arms stood up and said, in the last 6 months, because of the knowledge I've gained through this program, I've doubled my crop yield and I bought a goat, which means she now has an asset. She can feed her family, it's producing milk. And it's all about knowledge. It's back to what Diana and I were talking about earlier, which is when you really get to it, it's all about creating a community with a sense of purpose and trust and knowledge. And these principles you developed around how to do that, the mechanisms of Scrum have really put legs on it. So I want to thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you. I mean, this doubling thing keeps on coming up. If you read Professor Webeck's book on lean thinking, in the first chapter he says, the first signal that you've actually implemented lean is that your production doubles. And so I've been when going around doing Scrum training. Let me sample in here. How many people doing Scrum in here? Almost everybody. How many have data showing that you at least doubled your velocity? See, so even here, that poor farmer in Uganda has better data than the software teams. That's shocking.
Yes.
Maybe it's because Steve did a better job of coaching.
Yeah, the plan, do, check, act implies empirical. It's an empirical process. You're a PhD in statistics.
Yes. So I like data, and I realize the shortcomings of data, that it always has to be, as people say, statistics can prove anything. But on the other hand, I'm seeing more and more, particularly with management, as you were talking about, there's more and more questioning at the senior level. What are the metrics we're going to use to run our agile organization? We've totally sold. We drunk the Kool-Aid, but we actually need some data.
This has to be evidence-based. That's one thing. In fact, as Lean has moved into other domains, that's one thing we've learned as Lean has moved into healthcare. Because healthcare is completely evidence-based, and we can learn from that as well. I know you.
Well, this is. I started in healthcare in 1975. So, and I used to be CTO of what is now GE Healthcare, and some other healthcare companies. And I was heavily involved in the whole patient safety movement in healthcare. And 85% of what a doc treats you is not evidence-based. There's some statistics for you. People would like it to be evidence-based. There's also some significant issues around clinical trials, for example. When I got my PhD in a medical school, and so we statisticians ran all clinical trials. No doc could publish anything without a statistician. And so we promoted them, we're big believers, but unfortunately, if you just take a random group of people and give them a drug, and they do a little better, it doesn't account for the genetic diversity in the sample that you've taken. And it may be some people need twice as much, some people need half as much, some people shouldn't be getting the drug at all. So we have this problem that, in general, the public's not sophisticated enough to ask the right questions about the data.
So what you're saying, a balance of data and experience in general.
Right.
Okay.
So it's not bad that 85% of what the physician does is based on his judgment. He may say, if I give you the standard dose, it makes you really sick. I think I'll cut it back a little bit. That's going on all the time.
True. Well, I thank you for letting me override the schedule here, Jeff. It's really good to have you be a part of this. So thank you for coming.
Thanks for inviting me up here.
Let's give our special surprise guest a hand. Nice to have Jeff visit. Thank you, Jeff. That was great. So we have just a couple minutes left, Steve, and so I thought I'd give you a soapbox if you'd like it. We have about 3 minutes to wrap up. If there's any last remarks you'd like to make before I remind everybody about the green, red, and yellow cards and so forth, it's yours. Otherwise, we'll just wrap up.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
Indeed.
I really appreciated the diversity of the questions and the thoughtfulness of the questions. I think you all have gathered by now that in my mind, Lean and Agile and Scrum are all really dipping from the same well, the same principles of purpose and collaboration and learning. And the more we can do to move beyond the labels and the tools and the practices and really focus on what it means to create an organization of any size with a clear sense of mission and purpose and an environment of trust and respect, and encouraging everyone to experiment in everything they do every day, because the world is changing faster now than ever every day. And those organizations that are not only just going to survive and thrive in our lifetime are those that are able to start thinking that way. And I don't care what you call that whatever you want to call it, put any label on it, you will. But I think those are the timeless principles. And so let's all continue this journey together. And I really appreciate you having me here today.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for bringing all that breadth and depth to it. It's been a pleasure having you here. And so for all of you who've been here, please don't forget the red, green, and yellow. But just remember the green cards. That's really all that matters. And go have a break, and we'll see you at the next session. Thank you again, Steve, very much.